Welcome back to the Breach Report brought to you by PurpleSec. This is Joshua here with Jason again, and this week we're going to be covering some interesting new malwares as well as some follow-up from the Accellion breach, as well as CD Projekt Red's breach, and some international news with Chinese cyber spies targeting Tibetan organizations. Starting things off, this new Mac malware is called Silver Sparrow. This is coming to us from Red Canary. Silver Sparrow is a macOS malware that uses a launch agent to establish persistence. What's novel about it is that it's using primarily JavaScript, which is atypical for macOS software. And interestingly, it's also been written for both Intel and the M1 ARM64 architecture.
So they're writing it for both chips?
So for a long time, MacBooks were using Intel as well as some of the workstations. M1 ARM64 is Apple's new chip for that. So what they're trying to do here is just cast a wider net, right? Catch both new and old architectures. To good effect. So they've infected 29,139 macOS endpoints across 153 countries as of February 17th, according to Red Canary. High volumes detected in US, UK, Canada, France, and Germany. Pretty popular spots for people to own Macs. What's really interesting about this is it seems like the malware doesn't do anything, which is not something that we've really seen on this show before. And we'll kind of get to what it does. But we talked about there being two versions. This is a quick overview of what that means and kind of what it's aimed at. So we've got this version 1, both updater.pkg, and version 2 is called update.pkg. So two different files, two different payloads that come in, one for each architecture so that they can capture whoever they need. So this thing is an installer. What happens is then it calls out to a remote website and installs another file. I'm gonna skip past. There's a lot of in-depth analysis here, and we'll put this link up if you're really interested in seeing all the code, but it's too technical right now. So here we go.
Very in-depth.
Yeah. I mean, this is they did the research on it, so I'm gonna let them cover that. But real quick here, we can see the URL calls back to an Amazon AWS S3 bucket with a little JSON file, right? So this actually is being hosted up in the cloud too, which hey, everybody's using the cloud these days, even the hackers. Okay, so you see mysteries on mysteries here. So what it's doing is installing these little in the temp file, these weird little files, and one of them ends in ._insu. That's the actual file extension, and it's empty. No
It's
idea why.
empty. It doesn't. So
Yep.
it's a malware that does nothing.
Well, it doesn't quite do nothing. So that file's empty. Then it finally makes another callback to download one last little thing here. And so it's basically telling its command and control server, hey, I'm alive. And then if you open these PKG files, it's literally a hello world application.
So
Just like you write on day one of
it
Java
does
class.
do nothing, but it does something, but it does a whole lot of nothing by.
Right. So the difference here is if you're on Intel, you get hello world. If you're on the M1, you did it in red.
Oh wow. Okay, and this was okay. That's so bizarre.
So maybe it's somebody's college project. I don't know. You write these and it's like your my first program, right? Hello world.
I wonder if because it seems kind of harmless. I wonder if it was like someone was proving that they could get a bug bounty or something.
So that's one of my initial thoughts here too is that it's a proof of concept either way you look at it, whether it's a malicious proof of concept or it's a proof of concept for research purposes for school. I mean, it's malicious if you're sending this out though to people without them asking either way. So if somebody did this as a project, you don't do that. What concerns me is this final callback, right? So what's happening is this thing's going out, the package file's got nothing, but it is communicating with the server out there and saying, I'm here to some effect, right? So that's kind of your proof of concept there that somebody somewhere is proving that this file hit these Macs. Now, it could be a test for a possible bigger attack, a new a new threat, an
Yeah,
emerging threat.
let me ask that. How many steps away were they from being able to do something malicious with this? You know,
I
if they were
mean,
able to get a file on there, would they have easily been able to get some ransomware
they did it
on there?
really. I mean, you got
Yeah.
code to execute
So
on the end
yeah.
machine, so
So
you
that's my
have what you
yeah.
need.
Yeah, that's my point. So I mean, they could have done something if they wanted to, but they didn't do it intentionally, but they wanted people to know that they could do it.
Which is what I do when I'm doing pen tests. That's the proof of concept, right?
Hmm.
Because you don't want to actually break the machine, but if you can, if there's an end user working and you're like, hey, you were pen tested, right? Then you prove that happened, and that's what happened here. So
Yeah.
I guess the question is, what's the intent
Yeah,
ultimately?
yeah, so
And we're gonna
bizarre.
see
And
with that.
it was a relatively small footprint too. So what is something that we can do or people could do to maybe remove this type of malware or
So if you want a really long write up, if you're a technical person, check out the link we're gonna put here from Ars Technica. So it's 8 pages, but the highlights here is that you're going to be deleting these files. You're opening up terminal app, you're gonna RM whatever files are there. And the files are here on the Red Canary report. So we have these slash library plist files, the updater.pkg file. Effectively, really, you're just looking for these and deleting them because it's really all you can do. It's not really doing anything. And I'm sure at some point a malware,
So would
if you
you
have anti-malware, is
recommend
going to.
if you are a Mac owner or have a Mac, any type of Mac device that uses
Mhm.
this chip, would you recommend that someone go out and follow these instructions and do this today?
Yes. Now, they they put bold here, and I'm going to repeat it too. Is you cannot undo this when the RM command is remove, and it's very powerful, and it will listen to you. So you've got to make sure that you've you know, checked for the files first, made sure they're there, and made sure that your paths are correct. RM can be extremely destructive if you're not careful.
Mm-hmm.
But if you follow this, you'll be fine, and keep that in
Excellent.
mind.
Yeah, go out there if you have Mac and get that done, get that taken care of. Now we have a pretty big story here that we want to cover next, and I think that this is really big for a number of reasons. I think it's one of the most significant. I don't know if it's the largest dollar value, but in my mind, it's one of the most significant breaches of a video game company in an industry that is just exploding right now. So, Josh, you want to take it away and talk a little bit about what happened to CD Projekt?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct with the dollar value there. I can't think of anything that's been quite the size, not in recent memory anyway. I know Nintendo's had a pretty good sized breach in terms of gigabytes leaked, but CD Projekt Red's breach here actually ended up being auctioned, and there was money involved. So let's take a look here. This is their report, which, by the way, is on Twitter and nowhere else. I'm gonna read
What?
it real quick. Yeah,
What do you
well,
mean?
so this is their update, right? It's on Twitter. It is not on their
They,
website.
they don't have like a newsroom or anything. Like the only way you could access
Now
it.
it could be. I could be wrong, but I tell you what, I looked under their news section. I went through all these pages, didn't see anything about it. If you go to their support page, it's game specific,
Huh.
so it's not like there's anything for you to really find here. So yeah, I think this was their
Bizarre.
only announcement, which I don't think is really that good. I mean, I understand not necessarily wanting to plaster all over like, hey, we were attacked, but you do need to make sure that these are accessible for your users, and in a lot of places that's actually law, so it's got to be available somewhere else, but it's
Yeah.
definitely here on Twitter.
Okay.
So they said an unidentified actor gained unauthorized access to our internal network, collected certain data belonging to CD Projekt Capital Group, and left a ransom note, the content of which we released to the public. Although some devices in our network have been encrypted, our backups remain intact. We've already secured our RT infrastructure and begun restoring the data. We will not give in to the demands, all the boilerplate stuff they're
Mm.
investigating. So the key thing here is they were actually encrypted and data was actually taken. So it's that's as impactful as a ransomware can really get.
Hmm.
Here's the ransom note they left, which is pretty hilarious. You have been epically pwned. We have dumped full copies of source codes from your Perforce server for Cyberpunk 2077, Witcher 3, Gwent, and the unreleased version of Witcher 3. Ooh, never heard that before. We have all dumped all of your documents relating to accounting, administration, legal, HR, investor relations, and more. Also, we have encrypted all of your servers, but we understand that you can most likely recover from backups. If we will not come to an agreement, then your source codes will be sold or leaked online and your documents will be sent to our contacts in gaming journalism. Your public image will go down the shitter even more and people will know how shitty your company functions. Investors will lose trust in your company and the stock will dive even lower. You have 48 hours to contact us. And I read that verbatim as it was left on them. So grammar and
Perfect
all.
English, yeah.
Yes.
So wow, they're going to take all of that data. They have the source code. They're claiming to have the source code, and they're going to, if they don't get this ransom payment, they're going to auction it off. You'd mentioned that there was an auction, right?
Right. So this announcement came February 9th. The Verge has a report here from Kela, Kela, cybersecurity firm
Mm-hmm.
who investigated this. And this took, really, it took a day. So the next day, they were able to confirm the authenticity of this auction, that it was actually happening. And
So
there's
they, so
quite a bit
they,
here.
they authentication of the auction,
So
not the source code.
that's unclear in their report. Um,
Mm,
what they're effectively saying, though, is these guys definitely have something of your data and they are definitely auctioning it. So,
okay,
and it's possible they aren't making that as public because there's a lot of proprietary stuff here potentially involved.
also, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, like I was talking about, the gaming industry is huge, right? So I think it's estimated to grow to $200 billion industry by 2025.
Right.
And from what I've kind of hear, I mean, I'm not in the gaming world or in that industry, but from what I hear, that's pretty cutthroat, and it's labor intensive, and it's an expensive company to run, to develop a
Yes.
game. It takes a lot of money to do. And so, it wouldn't be outside of the realm of possibility, for one of these companies to say, hey, yeah, I'll spend a couple $1 million to get the source code of a AAA game.
Yeah.
That's going to definitely help me, and then I don't have to invest $40 million into building out my own program, or I can just take it here, and it's only going to cost me 2 million.
Yeah. So, I mean, if this was, I guess if there's any good thing to take away is this is already developed code by CD Projekt Red. Imagine if they had taken being developed. I mean, they said the unreleased version of The Witcher 3. I don't know if that just means cut data or if it's something they're actually working on.
Could be like a
If
DLC or
if
something
it's
like that.
something they're working on, though, that point you made really it becomes really critical because you're not making money from a video game until you've finished releasing it and sold it. So
Hmm.
you're paying people for labor hours, and if it ends up delaying or crippling that development, that is money down the drain.
Hmm. Yeah, or what happens if it cripples the development and the game just completely flops, right? Because of that.
Yeah. And brand damage is something that we talk about as well. So you're asking about the authenticity of the data. Obviously, they aren't super clear about that, but this is a quick little snapshot of some of the stuff we see here. So, we see root red engine r4.dlc. So red engine is their engine. That's really the IP right there, is
Hmm.
gaming engines for gaming companies. If you can steal the gaming engine, I mean, it's just the same thing as stealing somebody's, blueprints for any other invention, really.
Hmm.
So
So they have that.
r4.mal.
Yeah. It's just
Yeah.
interesting. They don't explicitly say that they have authentic authentication of the data, but they've authenticated that there is an auction being taken to sell
Right.
data.
And it says it's selling source code. So I mean, I think they're saying it without so much saying it, as really the only person who can for sure authenticate that is their source code is CD
Mhm.
Projekt Red, and they may not have had eyes on this yet. But they said
Yeah,
the auction
maybe that's
offers
fair.
source code, and it's a legitimate auction. Although I do kind of want to question that legitimate auction. That was something we're going to cover too. So um, There's a lot more screenshots here. You know, these guys are active on Twitter. You can go follow this on Twitter at VX Underground or the bad guys. You know, Twitter has a ton of this stuff available up there. Um, but what's interesting was they actually held this auction for, it started at $1 million, right? And they alleged that they were going to get up to $7 million for it. And you, in order for you to bid on this, you were required to put in zero point 0.1 Bitcoin, which at the time was 4,700 US dollars. You had to pay that just for the pleasure of bidding on it, right? And they held the auction for about 24 hours, and then they said they received an external offer that compelled them to, you know, sell it and not have the auction. So I
That's why
smell a
I
scam.
question. That's why I question the data. That's why I
Right.
question it. Yeah, no, I mean, I get what you're saying though, because it's like, suspiciously someone from the outside comes in and swoops it away from you, but all those people who put in that $4,700 to reserve their bid, they're
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right. So I mean, hey, maybe maybe they weren't as successful as they had hoped, but you know, they're like, well, we're gonna hold the auction anyway. We're gonna take people's money anyway, and just, you know, play it
You
out
know
the
what
game.
I'm gonna do? I'm gonna keep my eye out for any like what the next like big open world game is, like minus Grand Theft Auto. I'm gonna keep an eye out for the next big open world game, and I'm gonna just kind of eye them suspiciously. And just be
Right.
like, did you put an engine there?
Yeah.
um,
Uh, I'm
what?
sure we'll
Anything
see a
else
lawsuit
on
if
this
so.
story here?
So yeah, there is actually some other confirmed fault. So the whether or not the source code was legitimate and whether or not somebody actually bought it, don't know that for sure yet. One thing that is for sure, as confirmed by Cyberpunk developer CD Projekt Red themselves, is it actually delayed a big patch, which is, you know, if you've been following this game, is really unfortunate. The patch 1.2 is supposed to be a huge quality of life improvement for a lot of the, you know, things that have been getting bad press from this game. It's supposed to fix a lot of that stuff. So on Twitter here, they say, while we clearly wanted to deliver patch 1.2 for Cyberpunk 2077 in the time span we detailed previously, the recent cyber attack on the studio's IT infrastructure and extensive scope of the update mean this unfortunately will not happen. We'll need some additional time. Our goal is for patch 1.2 goes beyond any of our previous updates. We've been working on numerous overall quality improvements and fixes, and we still have work to do to make sure that's what you get. With that in mind, we're now aiming to release the second half of March. It's not the news we enjoy sharing, but we want to make sure we launch this update properly. So they're originally supposed to release it, have already released it. This statement went out on February 24th. So the encryption of their systems has had a direct impact to their development. I mean, that's just like a factory shutting
Yeah.
down a little bit. You know, that's major, and these guys don't need any more bad press right now,
That's that
honestly.
brand reputation. Yeah. I mean, that
Yeah,
goes back to what you were talking about with that. And then you figure this is a big title. Like this, people don't. I don't think people understand this. I'm looking up some stats here. Just after a month or 2 months after it was released, it had sold 13 million copies.
yeah.
So you're talking
Is that global or just in the U.S.?
that's global
Yeah, so I
today.
mean, that's worldwide eyes on this
And
for
that
sure.
was just within the first couple months. And
Right.
so, figure there's a big spike and then it kind of dies down and then maybe they release a DLC and then there's a little bit of a spike of activity and then kind of plateaus and then if you've ever played those video game simulators, that's kind of how that works. It
Yeah.
just kind of plateaus and then dies out and then you release the next game, build up hype
Right.
around it. But to your point, the quality of life stuff, like that's huge. I mean, like there were people who were completely turned off of this brand, like all of these games. But you know, I think at at the other end of the spectrum, it's The Witcher 3, like like
Right.
it's Cyberpunk, like they're big names. It's
Yeah.
just unfortunate that this happened. So yeah, no, I was only kind of half joking about looking out for like a copycat game. I'm like, I wouldn't be too it wouldn't be too out of the realm of possibilities if
Wouldn't be
that's
the first
exactly
time.
what happened. Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to the next one. This is a follow up from what we talked about last week with that Accellion breach. This comes to us from Canadian airplane manufacturer Bombardier. It's been around a very long time. Um, Bombardier announced that it recently suffered a limited cybersecurity breach. An initial investigation revealed that an unauthorized party accessed and extracted data by exploiting a vulnerability affecting a third-party file transfer application, which was running on purpose-built servers isolated from the main Bombardier IT network. Where does that sound familiar from? So um,
Yeah, it was
they
really
don't
funny.
explicitly say Accellion in this one, but
I
yeah.
was just going to point that out. It was really funny when you shared this article with me. I was reading through it and I read FTA and I'm like, FTA, another breach with an FTA appliance? Is this like, I'm going like Sherlock Holmes on it. I'm like, is trying to connect the dots. I'm like, wait a minute. And then I look and it's Accellion. I'm like, oh, duh.
Yep. Yep. So that's there you go. So you're learning to be an analyst already.
Yeah, but so like, but it did get me thinking about something else. Kind of keeping the analyst hat on, maybe to some degree, is that the whole purpose of this application that we talked about last week, um, was that it was a legacy software, right? And they patched the vulnerability, and the attackers got in, and then they patched it again successfully the second time.
Right.
But I think I just wanted to kind of bring up a point that legacy software as a whole, is going to leave you at a disadvantage, right?
Yep.
That just kind of goes to the lack of digital transformation. And if you're not adapting, and your industry is not adapting, and you're not radically changing and preparing your processes for change, then you're going to be left behind. And the reason I bring that up is in this case, this is kind of, more of a software business use case, but I think it also applies to security. If you're not keeping on top of the latest and the greatest, not just from a tool set perspective, but taking what we talk about in this breach report, looking at where the trends are. We know that ransomware is a really big threat. So what are some things that we can do to enforce better practices and standards around how we handle ransomware? So I think all of it kind of goes a little bit more full circle in that regard, but just wanted to just kind of a thing that popped out when I was reading through this again.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's spot on for IT. But and I do want to point out a little bit of something here, and maybe this is another topic we should dive into on a different series. Uh, OT, operational technology, though, is where you'll see the most amount of legacy software, and that's or legacy anything really. This one kind of made me think of it because it's possibly an OT kind of thing. So operational technology is meant to be pretty static. Um, and so you kind of have to use older stuff, but that doesn't mean you can't do it safely. And there's a couple things. One is, zero trust is really where a lot of people should be going because, again, this is a third party that your data's on. But Bombardier mentioned something that a lot of people should be doing, which is correct, is it was running on servers isolated from the main Bombardier IT network. And that is absolutely the correct thing to do with legacy software. Um, and if it doesn't need an internet connection, it should be completely isolated from all connections, which a lot of OT is.
That sounds very similar to like how electric grids or like SCADA systems or SCADA
SCADA's a
systems.
great example. Yep,
Yeah.
SCADA.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. That's exactly what it
Yeah.
sounds like. So, yeah.
Manufacturing, oil and gas, energy, that's where you're going to find the most of that stuff. But really anywhere, anything that controls equipment tends to be OT. So, and there's so much more overlap these days because you control that now with servers and laptops, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, So their forensic analysis revealed that personal and other confidential information relating to employees, customers, and suppliers was compromised. Approximately 130 employees located in Costa Rica were impacted. Bombardier has been proactively contacting customers and other external stakeholders whose data was potentially compromised. The ongoing investigation indicates that the unauthorized access was limited solely to data stored on specific servers, which is what we've seen with this Accellion breach. Is it's been very limited in scope. Um,
Yeah.
so we
And
we do know what kind of data was breached with a follow-up article here from ZDNet again. Let's scroll down here. So the data shared on this internet site included. So sorry. Let's back up a little bit. So their data actually was also shared. That's right. The data that was stolen was put up on the internet for the public to access. The data that was shared included design documents for various Bombardier airplanes and plane
so
parts.
all of the data that they stole, that they stole, or they
So it's not
released all of it?
Yep. So they stole
Okay.
the data and they released it, and it was made as available as a free download. So they didn't even ask for money for it.
Huh.
Kind of an opposite of CD Projekt Red, which is really that's interesting because a lot of this Accellion stuff seems to have been financially motivated, but I'm not really sure why you'd release
Okay,
something for
okay. Hear me
free.
out on the Bombardier one. Hear me out on the Bombardier one. Boeing or who's the other big one? Um, geez,
Airbus.
Airbus are doing some corporate espionage, and they hired some hackers to to go and leak the Bombardier. No,
I
I'm
feel like
kidding.
the
I
Mission
don't know.
Impossible theme should start playing.
I don't know if that's true, but
So there's some
it's so weird
attribution
because
here.
there's like no overlap in the industry compared to the others that we were tracking, right?
So that's kind of mentioned here. FireEye said in a report that it seems like the extortion efforts are it's it's less targeted and more so that they were able to attack somebody, Accellion, and then that gave them the ability to extort
Yeah.
its customers through that. So maybe it's just like an opportunist kind of thing. Um, we talked about it's called CLOP or Fin11 based on FireEye. So we do have attribution, but yeah, kind of funky. It's always interesting to see these ones that really contrast with like with the CD Projekt Red, right? That thing was like a
Hmm.
huge multi-million-dollar one. This is like, hey, have Bombardier's airplane downloads for free.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's such a weird thing.
All right, so we got a little bit of time left, so let's cover the last one here. Chinese cyber spies targeted Tibetans with malicious Firefox add-ons. So talk about targeted attacks. This is targeted based on browser, ethnic group who owns the organization, or individuals. So it's extremely targeted. Again, we're bringing this to you from ZDNet. So it starts off with a phishing email, just like every hack ever does. Um, somebody goes to u-tube.tv, which is not a real website. And there they have a JavaScript profiling script. Finds
Let's
out
zoom in
whether,
on that image just a little bit more.
yeah, let's see. Yeah, I can't bring it up in its own. Here we go.
Yeah, yeah,
How's
there
that
you go.
look?
Yeah, that's good.
So if it's not a Firefox browser, and this is what helps it work, it sends them to real YouTube, so they're none the wiser. If it is a Firefox browser, however, this is where it actually ends up installing a malicious Firefox extension. Um, this extension gives them all kinds of access to Gmail, to um, their personal information in the browser itself. So there is an attribution to this too. It's a hacker group called TA413 based on Proofpoint. So we don't really know much
And
about them.
who's that? I don't know who that is.
So it's been attributed to China as a sponsor, threat actor 413. So this is what they give somebody who isn't an APT that they've like a big cyber gang, like the Russian ones that we talked about before. So it's like they're kind of tracking. It's like a newer sort of
Oh,
thing,
I
right?
see, I see. Okay.
Yeah, it's like a developing thing, right? So it's been attributed to China um,
I wasn't sure if
through
there's
their
a, like if
research.
they were so they're newer threat um coming about. Okay.
Sure. Yep. So they're super targeted on this. So if you're a Firefox user, you get this malicious add-on. This malicious add-on then allows the attackers to access your Gmail, so they can search, archive, read,
Wow.
send. I mean, that's everything. It's full
Everything.
Gmail
They
access.
might
Yeah,
as well just be you.
yeah, they're logged into your Gmail, right? And
Well, no,
then
no, but it's not just that, right? Wouldn't they be able to do like, hey, I forgot my password to my bank account?
sure,
Do a
and
one-time password.
they can also utilize this to do things remotely, so they don't even need to necessarily log in. They can use this to send spam, to do whatever they want, really. I mean, it's full control right there. They can even
It's
delete messages, so they can get your new update to your Gmail, read it or forward it, and then delete it, so you didn't even know it happened.
yeah, that's the funny thing. Like, what's the domain admin equivalent for like the individual user?
Right.
And I think it might be their email.
Yeah, absolutely, you're right, because it controls everything.
Yeah.
So in addition to that, they can actually access other browser tabs, read and modify privacy settings, access user data for websites, so they can get your cookies, they can get all your stored passwords and stuff if you've stored it in Firefox's save password functionality. Um, read and modify privacy settings is interesting because that allows you to actually modify Firefox's security sensitivity, so they could potentially be exposing users to even more malicious websites. It actually also installs the Scanbox malware, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Um, so it's full control. They end up with a malware, and what's interesting here is this is actually kind of helped along by Flash's end of life, because normally this type of attack would have worked where it's like, you need to update your Flash, and it has the big, cartoony looking warning symbol, and most people by now know not to click on that. But now that Flash is gone, you can't see those anymore, and so these kind of end up as like, you can hide click-throughs. It just doesn't tell you at all that Flash is even attempting to be used here in any malicious way. So it did kind of blind the users a little bit to it. Now, Scanbox is a reconnaissance framework, and frameworks are typically what you see coming out of APTs, because it's more than just one hack, one malware. It's like your full setup. It's like having a full remote session, so it allows you to do all kinds of stuff. And they typically have click and play type stuff, plug and play. So you can adjust all these things, screen height and width, char set. I mean, it gives you full access to all of their web browsing activity. Now, this is super in depth. We'll put a link here. This is from uh, Alien Vault, and we also have one here from Proofpoint. Proofpoint's the one who originally reported on this and are tracking these guys, and they provided this graphic here for us as well.
Yeah, this is, I think, an example of why people were so worried about TikTok or Huawei
Yep.
with just the information gathering. It's all. I mean, in this case, it's more like cyber espionage on the border of terrorism, I would say, to an extent, because when you think about it, like, we were kind of half-heartedly joking about the email thing, but you can completely own a person's life if you own their email. If you really think about it, like, you can set up appointments as yourself, pretending to be that person. You could drain bank accounts if someone's doesn't have good credit freeze or anything like that, or there's so many different ways that they would be able to get you. um, but it's just another example of, we need to start practicing good user hygiene. I don't
Yep.
know. I don't know in what case this might have helped. Just this was so specific, but it just kind of brings to mind, like, am I doing everything that I can just to protect my email? That, step one, and then from there I can kind of go on and start thinking about other things like data or passwords and things like that. But
Yeah, it's we're still at a turning point with security. Like, people aren't quite there yet, like they are with other things. Like, when you leave your house, right, you lock your house. You don't even think about that. You lock your car when you walk away from it. Like, that's second nature now. People aren't like that about security, with rotating passwords, with checking the domains, with all these things you have to think about. It's a lot of stuff too. And it's really hard to put that all on the everyday user. But on the other hand, everybody does need to attain some kind of basic standard level of understanding to really protect themselves.
yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, do some type of, like, security awareness training at the minimum. Um, so, is there anything else coming out of this particular attack?
So if you are one of the people who are savvy enough to take a look at your own system and check on this, you can tell if you've been compromised looking for connections to any of these URLs. If you've been to them, u-tube.tv is one I talked about. There's a bunch more here, again listed on the Proofpoint link.
For our 2 viewers in Tibet.
um, so yeah,
Ultra
it
specific.
is ultra specific, but if you want to check this stuff out, if you're a researcher, these are
That's
also
interesting.
available there, so you can sandbox this stuff if you feel like it.
Awesome. Well, Josh, thanks for walking us through this week in the Breach Report. And if you guys like the show, you can like, subscribe, follow, share, comment, do all the stuff that makes the algorithm happy.